everyone. Welcome to another episode of Conversations We Need to Have. I am super excited to be talking to some of my contemporaries in education and some of my superiors in education, actually. I have a co-host with me tonight, Miss Christy Smith, and we're just going to be having an engaging conversation about education. I do want to put this disclaimer out here that I have guests who are educators on my show, not educators who are guests, if that makes sense. So that means that my guests are speaking from their personal opinions, their personal experiences. They're not representing any district, any school, or any administrative team. So we want to make sure that it's clear so that they can be at liberty to state their personal opinion and pull from their personal experience about things. So I'm going to just let everybody introduce themselves, starting with our co-host, Miss Christy.
Hey, everybody. Teachers, how y'all doing? Educators, admin, y'all all right?
Doing well.
Good. My name is Christy Smith. I am a sixth grade math and social studies teacher in Bibb County, Georgia. This is my 14th year in education. Well, my 14th year teaching. It's actually my 16th year in education. I worked in higher ed for 2 years before I started teaching. But I'm excited about tonight, and hopefully we're going to have a great conversation.
Okay. Mr. Mack?
My name is Dexter Mack. This is my 8th year in K-12. I also did a year and a half at Central Georgia Tech prior to becoming a teacher. I'm currently an assistant principal at Johnson County Middle High School in Wrightsville, Georgia.
Okay. And Valerie?
How are you, everyone? Good evening. My name is Valerie Miles. I'm a third-year special education teacher in the Bronx, New York. Currently, I'm teaching sixth grade math. I'm certified from 7 to 12. Before I started teaching, I was a child life specialist at Lincoln Hospital, which is located in the South Bronx. So I've always worked with children in some sort of capacity during my career.
And soon to be Dr. Tillman.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marsheila Tillman. We're going to speak that thing into existence. I am an assistant principal in South Georgia. And this is my 9th year in education, my 2nd year as an assistant principal. I've always worked in K-12.
And Ms. McInnis?
Hey, I'm Jimmy McInnis, and this is my 14th year in education. The last 13 years, I was at a middle school in Middle Georgia, and I taught social studies, language arts. I also did special ed. Now I'm teaching PE. Yay! So I'm really enjoying that right now during the pandemic. So it's a little different.
Okay. And we have Mark.
All right, my name is Mark Calvin. This is my 22nd year in education. I've been in everywhere from a classroom teacher to a high school administrator. Right now, I'm currently working in alternative adult ed, helping adults come back and complete their high school diploma. Currently, I'm in the Wichita, Kansas area.
Okay. So thank all of you for joining me this evening. My very first question, just out the gate, how's everybody doing?
Doing well.
Like I tell my kids, thumbs up, thumbs down. How you feeling?
Doing good.
So, and Smith, whenever you have a question, you can just jump in and interrupt me because I can talk all night. So whenever you have a question or something that you want to ask, just jump in and go for it. But so
Gotcha.
How's everybody doing with the pandemic personally? Like, as far as your how are you coping personally with this COVID-19 situation? Mr. Mack, how are you coping?
It's kind of different, especially when you get back into the building. We're always out in the halls interacting with the kids, and all of a sudden you have to be mindful of what you touch and how you move throughout the building. So it makes it kind of different. I just try to cope, and enjoy my hobbies, which is music, and even that's a little different. But I try to spend time at home and practice, and I stopped watching the news because the news is too much for me.
That is so
That's right.
You know, I used to be able to afford Mr. Mack to come and play with me in my band, but he's got too expensive now. So hopefully I'll be able to get my funds up to get him to come through one more time.
Oh man.
And Valerie, I know that you're in New York, which was probably one of the hot spots for COVID-19. So how are you all coping? How are you coping personally, and how are you all coping professionally with everything that's going on?
Personally, I'm just trying not to stress, take it one day at a time. It's different teaching wise. Again, the building is different. Trying to teach our children, safety as well as, content, and, trying to build in that social emotional learning, trying to build those relationships. And I think brain breaks have become very important. It's rough, but we'll get through it. Brooklyn has seen a spike, so numerous schools have went straight back to remote learning. So it's up and down, but we talk about it. We get through it together.
Okay. Soon to be Dr. Tillman. That's going to be my name for you tonight.
Well, for me, I work in the primary school, and so personally speaking, I've got my anxiety under control because, of course, at the beginning of the pandemic, so many people I know who either contracted the virus or passed away from the virus. So I was a bit anxious and nervous about returning to school. So because I work in a primary school, of course, you have so many distant, so many rules and, hot air hugs and all of that, but they're kindergarten. So no matter how many times you hold out your elbow to do an elbow bump, they're going to give you. And so, of course, it's so hard. It would be easy for me to hold up my, blocker. But they're so cute and so lovable, so hard not to engage them with a hug when they try to hug you. But it's been going well. I've gotten that anxiety under control and have been able to not let COVID interfere my ability to lead and coach and do everything else that we're required to do.
Okay. Ms. McInnis?
It's a little weird for me this year. I am in a gym. I am not a part of the regular building, so I'm just kind of stuck there in my own little world. And I don't teach a class every day. I do a weekly class. The way we've decided to do it is the specials class or connections or electives. They do one class per day at the end of the day. So I record my class, and that's pretty much all I have to do. So I'm left to my own devices most of the time. There are a couple of things I do here and there, but I don't know what word I don't want to say boredom. I'm not necessarily bored, but it's just kind of hard to figure out my place because I don't have students. So I don't know what I'm doing half the time.
Okay. And Mark, I know that you're more so a non-traditional school, and you all have been virtual years prior to, if I'm not mistaken, from our conversation. So how has that been a major shift for you in a non-traditional educational setting?
It's different for us because I think we're a little less impacted than a lot of the folks that are on the screen here and people around us, because 98% of our curriculum is online. They can be in their car on their phone. Now, granted, we have individuals of all types of abilities. So, we have some people who need to come in, but I mean, here in our classroom, it's social distance. But a majority of our learning and our curriculum and everything is online. So I spend a lot of time communicating with students over cell phone and computer. So we are a little less, for us here, we're a little less impacted than some of the school districts that are around us. but there's still an impact.
So I guess my next question, Smith, you want to jump in or?
I had a question, but you can go ahead. I'll go after you.
Okay. Yeah. So with COVID being what it is, and I know Valerie, so your kids are in school, right? They're physically in the building?
We kind of have this blended learning model, which means that if you choose to stay fully remote, you're going to log into Zoom and I'll see you on the smart board in the classroom. And if you're in the classroom, you're there with me on your computer. But the kids that are in the room with me are students that I don't teach. I just actually have to help them manage their schedule to make sure that they get online. So while I'm watching them managing their schedule, I'm sitting on my computer teaching my kids.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Mack, so y'all are fully functioning, right?
Yeah, somewhat. We gave kids and parents the option of whether or not they wanted to be in the building or be fully online. So we have a small population of kids who are at home doing theirs fully online, and then everybody else is pretty much in the building functioning, pretty much like we would in a normal school year with some slight variations for social distancing and things of that nature.
Okay. Smith?
Okay, so I know we were talking about the pandemic, but I've been wondering this, and this has been on my mind even before the pandemic. I talked to a lot of educators, and it seems to me that in the years that I've been in education, teachers are pretty much like losing trust. Like they have trust issues. So I want to know, and this could be for anybody if you put your 2 cents in, but why do you think educators are, let's say, losing faith in the education system? What is it that you think is wrong? Or is there something we can do to help fix it?
And just a disclaimer, because this is my show, I will go from interviewer to interviewee at any given time. So, because that's a question that I really want to answer, but I'm gonna sit back and let somebody else answer it, and then I'll answer after someone else.
I can go first. I think for me personally as a teacher, it's lack of equity and I guess resources because, especially being a special ed teacher because, a lot of them didn't know how to operate computers. A lot of my students didn't even have computers. We were waiting on the city to send them. So that's one aspect of it. And second of all, our administrators here, and I'm not, going to name any names so I don't get fired, but, they had 6 months to come up with, a school plan, and it felt like everything was done at the last minute. So the kids are asking me questions. I'm like, I don't know. They're like, well, I don't know either. So it was like, we'll figure it out together.
Well, I think from an administrative viewpoint, there sometimes can be a lack of communication or understanding from an administrative viewpoint and teacher viewpoint. Sometimes from my experience before I became an admin, I felt like some admin, principal, whoever, they get into these positions and they forget what it was like as a teacher. And I also, from experience now on the other side of the table, I understand that there are certain levels of accountability. Like the teachers are held accountable, the APs are held accountable, the principals are held accountable. Everybody is held accountable for something. And because there's so many things that are being thrown down the pipeline from people at the top, the teachers feel it the heaviest because, in my opinion, they're dealing with so much. The students, the parents, and they're having to do more than teach. I don't think it's done intentionally from an admin viewpoint, or I just think that there's so much accountability from people who seem to have probably never been in the classroom, or they've been so far removed from the classroom. It's easier to throw down or pass down, this is what needs to happen, without actually being in the room.
You just preached the whole
And
sermon.
I want to piggyback on that because I am now in the last 2 years of not being in again. I'm gonna just say I'm gonna say what I'm gonna say. How about that? Now,
yes, you are.
Administration is a very important part of, as a teacher. I have no desire to be an administrator. I know that the job is stressful. And I don't want any part of it because I would have been there and cussed a few people out and went about my business. However, the issue is, for me, when you are leading a person like me, I have to know that you are capable of leading. And because administration can add to the stress or alleviate the stress. The workload can be the same. We're not complaining about the workload, but like, I don't do well with micromanaging, and I was at a school where me and the administrator did not get along at all, and I'm a very direct person with whoever, and I'm a very honest person. You know, if I think that you're leading me in the wrong direction, I'm going to say something to you about it. I'm not going to go to another teacher and complain about it. I'm not going to do this. So, and I see a very big difference in that administrator and the administrator that I have now. Same workload, but different communicative tactics, I'll say. And so I think that, like you said, communication played a big part in that for me. And some teachers just leave me alone, write it down, send me an email. I like to ask questions. I like to give feedback. And a lot of times, and I'm not harping on administrators, Mr. Mack and soon to be Dr. Tillman, but a lot of times, like you said, administrators seem to forget, you know, and the administrator is not always the smartest person in the room. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they forget to listen to the people who are in the classroom, saying, you know, I think this would work better at this, blah, you know, whatever the case may be. So that's my little spiel on that particular question. So
let me just add a little bit. I think that, and I'm not an administrator yet, but I'm learning. I'm certified. I'm just not there yet. However, I just feel like, and I'll say when I become an administrator, the one thing that I know that I will not do is discredit the teachers. You have to take into account their opinions. You have to take into account the things that they say, because they're on the front lines. I mean, we are the teachers. We are on the front lines, and they are the ones who's really the expertise. You've been there, but you're not there currently, so you don't know exactly, you know, how it is at that point. So as an administrator, I think one of the biggest things they make a mistake on, and not all of them, this is just something I've seen, but is not taking the teachers' opinions into account when they're making decisions for the school.
Now, I want to say something, because I'm going to speak from an administrator's viewpoint. I think there is, with some teachers and admin, there is a misconception on both sides. You have some administrators who feel, for whatever reason, like there's a pressure to know it all and be the smartest person in the room. And then you have some teachers who kind of have that expectations with administrators without understanding that, hey, this is just a title. We're all a team. And you're right. The administrator no one person should be the smartest person in the room. And a wise administrator will find teachers and parents, whoever, who are experts in area that they don't know anything about, and use their strength. But sometimes there are administrators we know who are intimidated by teachers or whomever who may know more than they know in certain areas. And so I think that that's a big problem when it comes down to this whole administrator teacher thing.
And I do want to shout out my administrator. I'm not gonna call her name, but she know who she is.
You know, hey girl.
Yeah. So like, we work very well together. and I work with a good group of teachers, so my administrator this year, the last 2 years rather, has been like on point, because also you don't want to lose touch of humanity for bureaucracy, and we are in a traumatized state as a country, as a world, with everything that's going on. And you need administrators that know how to strike that perfect balance to speak to the humanity and speak to the professional. And I've seen my administrator do that with people because people on the outside don't really understand the breakdowns that happen inside the walls of those schools, because we all love what we do as teachers. So people don't really understand that, how many times the teacher will just break down crying. And sometimes they don't know why. So it takes an administrator to sort of shift from that, that leader and just become a colleague or a coworker at that particular moment. So
a lot of times it's all perspective, and I think the two current administrators on this call can at least partially agree with this. Sometimes a teacher will come to you as an administrator and they'll have a concern, and it is a legitimate concern. However, they are thinking this big inside their classroom, and administrators have to think holistically. They have to think for the entire building or the entire campus, or whatever it is. So those things, they get stuck in the middle, where they have to try to solve that individual teacher's problem, but they also have to solve that problem without disrupting the whole system. And that can be, the perception of, small world, big world can make it a real challenge for administrators.
I think going back to the communication aspect of it, a lot of times as an administrator, with all the things that we have on our plate, sometimes that communication isn't necessarily clear, particularly with a lot of the stuff that we've had to devise and implement as it relates to the pandemic. On the teacher's side, it's just like, here, this is what we got to do. This is how we're going to do it. And they may have questions. And in our rush to kind of, we have the saying in our district, it's called flexibility, because we were building the plane as it was flying. And so what we had to do is, we had to come up with all these guidelines and come up with all these procedures and push them out to the teachers. And if you don't communicate, why you're doing things a certain way up front, then you may have to field a lot of questions. So I think it all goes back to communications. And sometimes we just know, I know me personally, I have so many things on my plate, that still have to be done on top of the pandemic stuff. Sometimes when you push that stuff out, it's not from a standpoint, I'm the administrator and this is what you need to do because I'm an administrator and I said so. It's just more so of, I'm just trying to get to the next thing on my list to make sure school is running smoothly. So I think sometimes we may just need to slow down and, just communicate what's going on and why. And it may save us some questions and conversations on the back end.
And even from a teacher, go ahead, McInnis, I'm sorry.
I think, going back to what you said, Mr. Williams, I'm thinking back to Christy's question, and it was kind of like, you were talking about being in a different place. And I'm thinking to myself, if the culture doesn't jibe with who you are, if it doesn't fit with who you are, you probably do need to be somewhere else. And I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about everybody.
Yeah.
If you can't fit in with that culture, you do need to find a new place. And I feel lucky, just like you feel lucky at this point, because I have a great administrator. I'm in a great place. I like the way my administrator deals with me. I like the way the school feels. Mm-hmm. You feel the culture and climate as soon as you walk in that door. And if you find out that that's a place you don't need to be, it is time to go somewhere else. So I think that could be part of that equation, Ms. Smith. Like, if you don't fit in there, and I'm not talking about like you don't like the people there, maybe you just don't fit in with the culture there. Maybe maybe we need to find somewhere else to be. But I think that's what that made me think of the moment I heard that.
And that's how it was for me. And honestly, I did have issues with the administrator. It was very apparent, but also the culture was just different. And because I am an African American teacher, and so and this is a segue into another topic that I want to talk about. As an African American teacher, you have to handle things a certain way, not going outside the parameters of professionalism. But when you see Black kids that come from an urban community, and the lingo and the colloquialisms that they use in their talk, sometimes you have to communicate to them, and you can't always how can I say this, follow the pack. You have to really engage them in a manner that is on their level, and that's how I operate. I'm not going to cuss a kid out, but I'm going to talk to them in a manner that they understand.
And really, honestly, not to cut you off, I just want to put this in before you get off the subject, but honestly and truly, Williams, in all my years of education, that's been the one thing that helps to build my relationship with my students, is that they know I'm their teacher. They respect me as their teacher, but I am also on their level. So I make it my business, even if I don't know the lingo or whatever. I try to, learn the latest shoes, at least. I mean, the latest things that they like, whatever is trending at that time. Because when you get on their level and speak to them at that helps to build a relationship with them.
But when as a leader or anybody, if you're culturally incompetent, you're not going to understand how to relate to those kids. And if you're a culturally incompetent leader, they're going to look at you the way you interact or respond to students differently than what they think. They're going to look at it as, oh, something is going on with him, instead of truly trying to build those relationships with the kids themselves. So that happens all the time.
And I want to pause because I see Gary just came on. I want to pause and let him introduce himself, and we'll continue the conversation. Gary, how's it going?
Good evening. How's everyone doing? Good evening.
Good.
Yeah, I was having some difficulties. I don't know what was going on. Yeah, so glad I was able to log on and join the conversation. So,
okay.
How did we introduce it?
Get your name, where you're from. Yeah.
All right. So I'm Gary Johnson from St. Louis, Missouri. Currently, I'm teaching at Confluence Academy, Confluence Prep Academy, that's located downtown St. Louis. Serves 9 through 12. This Confluence Academy actually serves K through 12, but I work at the high school, and we're one of the charter schools here in St. Louis. So, I also the head football coach, head track coach, and a couple other things in the building, but that's where I'm working at Confluence Prep Academy, downtown St. Louis. So.
And he's also on the city council.
I didn't hear what you said.
You're on city council, right?
Oh yeah, I'm also a city councilman in the city of Jennings. It's a suburb, St. Louis County. Yeah, yes.
Okay. And I want to go back to Christy's question as well, because that's a very good conversation. Because I don't want to unpack this, but even when we talk about the trust of education, and I don't want to turn this into a political situation, but I think for me, and anybody can dispute me if you want, but I think education, well, let me ask this question. Should education be regulated from a federal level, or would it be best served to be regulated on a state level? And I see Mark shaking his head. I would love to hear your input on that.
I think it's the same as having a regulation on a federal level would not be a good idea, simply because one size doesn't fit all. The things that work for me here in Kansas may not work for Gary in Missouri, may not work for Mr. Mack in Georgia, or any of the others. So a federal one size fits all is not a good idea. I mean, because I can guarantee you, all of our school systems on this chat right now, they all run differently. Why? Because they run differently to serve the people that the students of the community that we're in. So a federal regulation like that's I'm staunchly against that, because we one size doesn't fit all.
No, I agree with you 100% on that, Mark. McInnis, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. I like it, not even on a state level, but more so on a local level. You have and that's why we have these local board of educations, but then you have the state step in and say something. You're like, well, that's not necessarily going to work here. And what's really sad is a lot of things that we do now come down from a federal level, when most states out there, you're looking at 10% of their total budget coming from the federal government, but they're bringing in, or they're making us comply with all of these other things, more so than the state ever would. So it's just kind of weird how that works out even today. But I feel like it should be done more so on a local level than even a state level.
Okay.
I think maybe it should be a mix. Definitely not federal, because like Mr. Calvin said, one size doesn't fit all. But here in New York City, our schools are basically funded by, property taxes. 37% of, Black people in New York City own their own home. So only 37% of, the families, are paying these school property taxes. So you look at somewhere like the Bronx, where it's truly underserved, and I brought this up before, probably about the lack of resources and access. And, you drive 20 minutes or 10 minutes even into Bronxville, which is a higher socioeconomic status. Each child had a MacBook. Each child, the quality of the education is different. And it's because of those, property taxes. So maybe if there's a way that the state could equally distribute the funds to the cities, or if, I don't know, somehow the city and the state work together where everyone has equal access. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
And that begs, anyone wants to speak to that before I ask my next follow-up question? Go ahead, Gary.
Hear me?
Yeah, we can.
All right, so I would agree with Mack as far as like local level, having control on the local level. I'll give an example of so like in Midwest cities, we have those housing projects that were federally regulated back in the 70s and the 80s, and when they pulled those dollars out, it was very detrimental to the the neighborhood and the communities. So, and those neighboring communities that were relying on the federal dollars at that time couldn't lean on each other in a time of need, because they were pulling the dollars out and they were relying on the same funding. So if the schools, if it's federally funded and neighboring school districts are relying on the same funds and they pull the funds, everyone, not everyone, but people that are receiving those funds will all, have some kind of effect. So local, I would agree with Mack on the local level, having control because of the result of, the federal funds leaving and other districts not being able to support neighboring districts. So,
I think somebody commented on Facebook. I was going to say that in regards to the funds. I think, and I was going to talk about equity versus, equity. You provide resources based on their circumstances. So there are some districts or cities who need to me more resources, more money because of their circumstances. So instead of giving every district the same amount of money. To me, I really believe that there are some districts who need more money. So when I think of it from an equity standpoint.
That was gonna be one of my questions. I guess you guys are kind of getting into it. I was gonna ask, do you think the education system, like, do they really understand the difference between equity and equality? And
No.
and if what has been your experience? I see McInnis shaking his head like, no, he has something to say. Like, do you really think they understand the difference?
Well, look, I mean, they think if they give if they give one school, $50,000 and they give another school $50,000, it's the same, but it's not, because you're giving a school $50,000 that really needs $50,000. They're $50,000 in the hole, and the other school, they're going to use that $50,000 to put lights in at their stadium. It's like,
That's true.
like, what in the world? Like, that's the problem. It's you've got equality and you've got equity, and being equal is not the same as what they think it is. It's just money is money, but people need different amounts for different reasons.
And that leads me to this follow-up question. The United States falls very, 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 very. I want to talk about this nationally, then break it down to our individual state level. But the United States falls very low when it comes to the world's education. We're very low on the totem pole. My first question is, why do you think that is? My second question is, how do we fix it when we have people like you all were saying don't really understand not just equity versus equality? They don't understand education. When you talk about standardized testing, you have attorneys and millionaires sitting in room coming up with tests with psychologists to see what tests would fit where, with no classroom experience, no educational experience. So how do you manage that? And whoever wants to answer that question.
Yeah. There's a number of answers to that kind of thing. It's you notice the dead silence right after you answer that question, because there is a lot of ways that we can answer that question. How do we fix it? Well, there are a lot of things that need to happen, and I think number one, on the world stage, why do we rate so low? I think it's because we're comparing apples to oranges in one case. And this is just a scenario that I've heard. Countries that have a higher population than we do, they're saying, well, this country has more honors kids or more kids going into honors programs. Well, some of those countries have more kids than we have. They have more honors kids than we have kids in general. So it's kind of apples to oranges. Their system is set up a little different. But I think, and this stems all the way back to that first question. One of the stressful things about education is in our country, and well, I can speak for my state, we're making leaps and bounds, but we're not keeping up with the changes. We're using a model of education that is 100 years old. We're using an early 20th century education model 2 decades into the 21st century. So we're not able to adapt and adjust. I mean, that's one area.
I also, from a rural standpoint, I also believe that when you look at the amount of money Georgia spends on education compared to other states, they spend way less amount of money on in educating their kids. I mean, our kids versus the other states as well, especially in rural education. Even, I'm talking about rural education because I'm now working in a rural district. And even where I live is considered rural. And I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I know it's like the last report I read, it was a little bit over $5,000 per child in rural education. And in other states, that's like $7,000 less than what other states spend or spend on their kids. So I think it has a lot to do with funding as well.
I wish we got $5,000 per kid. That'd be awesome. Ours is our FTE is currently 4,500 and some change. So,
and even I think education is not viewed as significant because you pay for what you value.
mm-hmm.
And teachers, and we can all relate to this. I know the standard of living is probably different in New York and St. Louis and Kansas, but
Mm-hmm.
educators are all underpaid. And I propose, for those who are listening, the powers that be, no teacher should start out with $75,000, a year. And that way you can hold them accountable to their behavior, because when teachers are making $25,000, it devalues the prestige of the profession.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't. And I tell people all the time, you can't teach if you don't love it, because at some point you gonna pick up a desk and throw it at a student, or run behind a child with a stapler, and it's just gonna become just something that you don't want to do. So you have to love it. If you can survive an education over 2 years, 3 years max, you have to love something about it. And it has to be, I'm not, and I got to a point with one of my former administrators where I was like, I'm not even going for him. I'm going for the kids. And, you don't want teachers' morale to be sort of shaken in that sense. But I think equity as it relates to teachers is an issue. But go ahead.
No, I also want to add, then when you bring in, no shade towards anybody, but it further communicates that education is not really that big deal when you have to hire people who didn't hire waiver teachers. And I know there's a shortage in education. I get that 1,000%, but that further communicates that is not really of much value, in my opinion anyway, because you're not going to just tell someone in the medical field, hey, you want to be a doctor? So you can come on, long as you took 3 or 4 classes in biology in college, then you can come and train to be a doctor. I think it's the same. I've never really, I understand why we have to do it in our field because of the teacher shortage, but I don't really necessarily favor it. I don't really like it, but I guess it puts us in a position to where we have to.
And I've never looked at that from that perspective, soon to be Dr. Tillman. But one of the things that I do love about, there's a county in Florida, in Okaloosa County, where they treat their school system as if it's a college university. So they have people who have real world experience in whatever they're teaching. It's not like a waiver system, but it's more so if you want to teach accounting, they have CPAs who come on board their school system who have real world experience in accounting. It's not, you come from, you're a theologian and you're trying to teach economics. It's not like that, but they align their curriculum with the professions that's there, if that makes sense. And so I do understand your perspective because it does devalue. But I also think if we did something to the effect of not require so much for teachers to advance, it's like, you have to work in a school district almost 30 years to get, respect to be advanced to a higher in the hierarchy of leadership. So I do understand your perspective, though, as it relates to that.
I think it's, the flip side, of Ms. Tillman's point, in which I see exactly where she's coming from. But, from my standpoint, speaking as someone who did not go to school to be an educator, I came in at 32 years old, and I because I was a business major and I had worked in the business sector and I had that background, it was like a natural transition for me. So I think when you look at it from that standpoint, it's like you say, if you're hiring a theologian to come in and teach your economics class, you know, you're right. There's no value in that, but you have to find that value. And as administrators and leadership, you know, you don't just want to put a warm body in that seat. And I kind of take that approach, you know, when I sit down, you know, with the rest of the administrative team and interview people, I look at how I got to be where I am. And I like to think that I'm of value to my district, you know, wherever I may go. But it's a catch-22, and you just have to do what's best for the kids.
Smith, you have a question?
Okay, yeah. So now I'm gonna say this, that, you know, I want to talk about this, but I don't want to answer any questions about it. I just want to know what you all think about it. And you might want to, I know you want to.
I don't even know what it is.
But let's talk about the special education programs. What do y'all think about those? Do you think the special education program in education is broken, or is it working? And why? Why or why not?
Oh, you just opened a huge bag of worms with that one. I think in some cases it works excellent. If you have the right teacher in the classroom and you have the right system, I think it's excellent. But I've been in and around a lot of schools where special education was kind of viewed as those kids over there, you know, and it's not. And I've been in schools where those special education students they're growing by leaps and bounds in their ability. So, you know, I think it all goes back to getting the right people on the right seats in the bus. You know, is it broken in some places? You know, is it phenomenal in some places? You know, it really depends on, you know, like me as an administrator. Being an administrator was not my calling. That's not where I needed to be. I preferred to be, you know, as the military would say, in the rear with the gear. You know, I want to be where the rubber meets the road. I want to be where the kids are. So, you know, I wasn't the best as an administrator. So as under my tutelage in schools, maybe not so much. But as far as special education goes, I think the key is finding, you know, the right teacher for the classroom and then the right support system for that teacher to make it work.
I think before we answer that question, you know, is it broken or not? I think we have to take a hard look at our schools and ask the question, are these programs being implemented with fidelity? And it's just like Mark said, you know, you got to have the right people in the right seats in the bus. And each one of those people, you know, are they, you know, is that case manager reviewing this child's progress on a regular basis? You know, are they updating IEPs at the proper intervals with the proper procedures and the proper goals? You know, are they in the classroom? You know, are they co-teaching? You know, like they're supposed to be. So I think it goes back to what he said. You know, is it broken in some places? And if it's only broken in some places, and we're all supposed to be going by the same federal guidelines, then those places where it's broken, you're probably looking at a fidelity issue and not necessarily the program itself that's broken.
I agree.
So my response to Mr. Mack would be, when you talk about fidelity, then we'll have to look at, is the majority of the schools not operating with fidelity? And if they are not, then I would propose that it is because they have to do everything that you just named. And I always tell people, teaching is probably about 15% of what we do. And I really think that if teachers really just were able to teach, you know, and I understand that there has to be some CYAs and some, you know, the RTIs have to be done and the IEPs and all of those accommodations have to be done. But the bottom line is we have to teach. And I love teaching. But when other things start compounding that to where the actual teaching is suppressed, you can have so much bureaucracy and paperwork to do, you don't even have the wind to teach. Mm-hmm. And so that fidelity issue could be not intentional. It could just be burnout from having to do everything that looks like you're teaching, but teach, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
if I may add, I also think in some cases, not all cases, because every district is different, but in some cases it stems from lack of training. And I think Dexter, you talked about that too. Lack of training. You have, I know at some colleges, people, let's say they don't just major in special education. They have elementary education / special education. So how many courses are they really taking to learn about how to truly teach special education students? Because it takes a different, to me, type of training, additional extensive training, as well as some other stuff. So in making sure that the right people are in these positions, the case manager, the director of SPED, they have to truly know what it should look like to provide kids what they need.
Yeah,
I think that's a very good point, because go ahead.
No, go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
So special education, the school district I was recently at, Christy, I'm glad you asked that question, because special education is almost starting to, from my observations and where I've been, starting to become a dumping ground for behavior kids. I know we probably gonna get into that pipeline to prison thing, but Ms. Tillman just also mentioned the proper teachers, the proper training being in place. So if you're trained and you're ready for certain behaviors and certain things that are listed on IEPs, but you're getting dumped with extreme behavior problems. Ms. Smith, what does special education look like at that point when kids, instead of when they're tired of suspending them, they're sending them to special education, starting to test them and things like that, and it's almost an excuse to not educate them. And also, I've seen where parents are taken advantage of in this situation as well. That's what I just wanted to add that. So.
There's the list of, I'm just going to say the word disability, because that's how we look at it when you look at an IEP. I mean, you're looking at the word disability. There's a whole long list of disabilities, and for someone who has an education background or someone who has just gone to school for education, even if you have these special education classes, there's no way in the world you know enough about this particular form of autism or this form of ADHD or this particular disability or this kind of disability. There's so much to learn. How do you handle this kid? What are you supposed to do when they do act out? What are you supposed to do when they don't understand this? I mean, there's so many things that you have to know, and it's really hard to keep up, especially if you have a caseload. I think Ms. Browning made a comment earlier. If you've got a caseload that you've got 10 or 15 kids, 20 kids on a caseload, and you got to keep up with those kids as well as the kids in the classroom,
it's kind of difficult to do. And I'm not knocking Mr. Mack's comment about fidelity, because I believe in that. But the flip side to that is when you have one teacher who has to do, accommodate for 15 IEPs, and we all know IEPs is just an 8-hour day within itself. So it causes, like I said, burnout from that educator to try and teach. And SPED teachers have even more stress than general ed teachers. So I commend them for what they do, because it requires a lot more. In general ed, teachers have to do a lot already. So we'll just double their workload based on ours. So I think just having like resources in place, and that's where that word equity come back in. We should have more mental health professionals on site, because one counselor is not going to be able to accommodate a school of 700 kids. One counselor shouldn't be a one counselor to 350 student ratio.
Right.
And there needs to be something spoken to about the equity of having the right staff in place and having the right amount of staff, because I think that we've gotten accustomed to just, oh, I'm stressed, I'm used to it. And, because stress will kill you.
Definitely.
And I'm not trying to go and meet, I'm not trying to allow my sheet to become my winding cord. So, I'm just saying. So we have to speak to those type things and have people in place to ease the workload off of teachers. And it may be you have a surplus of 10 people on staff that you didn't think you need so that teachers can teach. It may be that you need to hire someone that is an IEP specialist that handles all the IEPs for that day, and confer with the teacher on what they need to know. But that's just my spiel on that.
I think that we talked about integrity, and I definitely agree with that special education does take some people who are going to work with integrity. But Mr. Johnson brought something to mind when he said that it almost became a dumping ground for those kids with behaviors. But why do you think, is it just the kids with behaviors that they're dumping in? Because why do you think the special education teachers have so many on their caseload? Why is it so many kids who are now qualifying for special education? We talked about, Mr. McInnis mentioned about how they may not be properly trained because they don't know how to handle certain situations. Now, I think that, as all educators, we should be forever learning and trying to increase and enhance our craft. But I believe that, special education teachers are like doctors. Like, they must be constantly researching, because for some reason disabilities are changing. Back when I was in school, the special ed kids were in a different classroom, and it was really something wrong with them. Now special ed we've got ADHD. So now they need to, we have to research, how do we handle these ADHD kids? Because almost every last one of them is ADHD, ADD.
And not to cut you off, soon to be Dr. Tillman, but and I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this. I am convinced, and if I do, then I'm used to it. But I'm convinced that our kids in these past few generations are overly medicated, and we are giving we are prescribing medicine for something that only requires patience. And so I think a lot of times we have kids in special ed who may be gifted, but the teacher hasn't been trained on how to identify, okay, this child is gifted. That's why they can't sit still. Because I remember a TED talk of a child who that they had written off and put him in special ed, and it was only until he got to 8th grade where he met a teacher, and the teacher realized, okay, this kid is too brilliant to be in special ed. And so after their research, they figured out this guy was practically a genius. And so I think a lot of times we don't have the patience to deal with a child who's a behavior disruption. The parent don't have the patience to deal with them. So we just medicate them, subdue them, and just have them, just become a body in the classroom, in a sped classroom, because we're prescribing something that we just don't have the patience to deal with. That's my take on that.
Man, you hit the nail on the head. 1000%. And that's actually, I was gonna talk about that in that family, but you're 100% correct. I think it has a lot to do with, and this is just my opinion. As you said, we know teachers from experience that they don't know how to deal with the kids. They don't know how, even academically, they don't know how to reach the child. Some kids are just so bored, and so they act out when they're bored. And with this whole RTI thing, like I literally heard somebody say that or RTI is to help them get into SPED. No, that has been the misconception.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
There are really people who have this mindset. They're just trying to do everything to, push them on through so that they can get tested, and it's doing our kids a disservice constantly.
I think part of it is, we get all these different concepts and ideas going, and I think a lot of it is simply, and I don't know what any of your religious backgrounds are or anything like that, but a lot of it is simply grace. A lot of it is simply, I put in a mile wide, a half-inch deep, and 500 miles an hour. That's how we teach. I've got to get from, chapter 1 to chapter 27 by the end of the year. Let's go. And the whole time we're doing that, we have a large amount of kids that are hanging onto the bumper, getting drug in the dirt. So, I think honestly, it's grace. How do we know how to deal with a kid with ADHD, with autism, with whatever? It's take 5 and talk to the kid, build a relationship with the kid. I had a special education kid not long ago that I kept having to go down to the room because he was causing all kinds of problems. And I just asked him, what do we need to do to be able to move forward? And quite honestly, he said, well, if I had a cup of coffee. And I was like, I tell you what, if you'll work the rest of the hour and keep working the rest of the week, I'll go get you a cup of coffee. Got that kid a cup of coffee, and he worked. I mean, it was like the rest of the 9 weeks, we need to slow down and listen to our kids and listen to what's going on, pay attention to what's going on. Grace is huge.
Patience. Patience.
That goes back, Mark, to what you was talking about earlier about an antiquated educational system. Mm-hmm. And when you are operating under an archaic educational system that and it's filled with bureaucracy, you really don't have time to slow down. Mm-hmm. And when you are trying to meet certain testing deadlines, you don't really have time to. I heard someone say, and I'm not going to state if I agree or disagree with it, but I heard someone say, are we? They asked the question: are we teaching kids to be educated, or are we teaching them to take a test? And I think that's one of the biggest conflicts of education. Are we teaching kids to prepare for a state assessment that will put a ding on the district, or are we actually teaching them to prepare for the real world education system? So I don't know if anyone wants to jump on that question or not, or we can just leave it where it is.
It's funny you said that. I was going to ask, do you think we test kids too much?
I think we're operating in a what I would call a duality. Mm-hmm. On one hand, you tell teachers, not to teach to the test, but there's always this understanding and there's always this cloud hanging over everybody, from the top down, because when that milestone test hits and those results come out and everything is not where it's supposed to be, then, we got a problem. Our teacher's going to get thrown up under the bus, our admin, or who's going to take the fall for this? So, and it's all, like you said, with the antiquated system, how do we move forward and teach kids to actually learn a skill and not just regurgitate information?
Well, and I'll tell you something practical, and I hope I don't have any math teachers on here, but teach them real world Smith, I'm sorry.
Let's get him, Miss Valerie. Let's get him.
Instead of let's take like trigonometry, and I'm talking mainly high school. Why aren't our high school kids learning how to balance a checkbook instead of something like real life? I know we have home ec, I know we have family and consumer sciences, but what about real life experiences? Why don't we have a pathway? And I think we have that here in Bibb County now, a pathway to a trade, where they can go learn how to build things in high school, because that's what other countries are doing. At 13 in China, they are building microchips for iPhones in their high school. So, I mean, what we have to do, we have to, like Mark said, we have to have a grace and a patience to try and assess each student. Okay, and we used to have guidance counselors when I was back in the day. They would tell you, are you a vocational student or college track student? And they would do real assessments, and most of the time, they were accurate in their assessment. Because they took the time. I remember when I was in high school, the guidance counselor met with us individually and spent as much time as needed to help guide us in what we were going to do post high school. So I think a lot of the issue is it goes back to patience, but it also goes back to the bureaucracy that hinders us from having that patience.
So what about it? It takes us back to what Ms. Tillman said earlier. As far as the waiver teachers, but it also brings us to teachers like and educators, and administrators like Mack, who bring their real world experience though. So, we get to the point where we want the kids to have, be prepared for the real world, but as educators, we were taught to teach. You know what I mean? We were taught to teach out of the book. We were taught to teach a certain at a certain progressive rate. We were taught to teach, within certain confines. So so now my question is, how do we as educators that were taught that way and, are, taught to teach that way, how do we become real world
I would like for Mark
teachers?
To answer that question. And then I see Val was about to answer, but I would love to hear Mark's take on that question.
Oh, Gary, when you were asking that question, one thing kept coming to mind that I was one of my high school teachers, and it's a long story, but she made this comment, and it's interesting. It's always stuck in my head. Some people are teachers. Some people are instructors. Teachers, it goes beyond the content. It goes beyond the book and the classroom, and the instruction. Instructors are like what you have at the college level. They just spit out information. Teachers are ones that, as we talked about before, as Christy said, have the patience. They have the grace. They have the understanding to discern what's going on with that student outside the classroom walls, and make adjustments in the curriculum based on those type of instructors. It's just rote knowledge, and they just go. So, and that's one way to perceive it. That's one way to look at it. Am I saying that's completely right or completely wrong? No, it's just a perspective.
And yeah, and then it's kind of like a domino effect to me. You have people who are making decisions about education who are so detached from education, and also there isn't, we know, like you said earlier, is that teachers are underpaid, so they're not putting the money into education like they are doing in other fields, and it's a domino effect. We end up being where we are and getting the results of what we currently are in our world of education because of it. I think it's all a domino effect.
I just wanted to add something, and this is just my personal opinion. When you talk about preparing kids for the real world, once upon a time in high school, I feel like that's what we did. And I actually feel like it was before my time, maybe the 70s, early to mid 80s. You had shop classes, you had auto mechanic classes, you had woodworking classes where you would teach kids to you work with their hands, because there wasn't this push to send every single child to college. And I feel like once we got to the place where every single child was expected to go to college, even like Zach, like I said, me and you not that far apart in high school. You either had a college prep seal, or you had a vocational seal, or you had both. They would push the college prep seal by itself, but they wouldn't push the vocational seal by itself. If you wanted a vocational seal, they would push you to get the college prep, so you would be dual sealed. But I feel like once we got to the point where we started pushing kids towards college, then there wasn't as much of a need to prepare kids for the real world, because they weren't necessarily going directly into the real world right after high school. And I think if we could kind of maybe get back to that, then we can start talking about, more of this stuff like the simple task in life, like I don't say the simple task, but the more essential tasks in life, like how to do your taxes, or how to balance a checkbook. I don't even think my kids have ever seen a checkbook before, because it's antiquated, because we don't necessarily use it, but you still need to know how to balance what's in your bank account. But that's just my opinion.
Right.
No, I agree with you 100%. Well, go ahead, Gary.
No, I was just saying I agree.
Yeah, and I think it feels bad, or some people may think that we are hypocritical when we say all kids are not meant to go to college, and all kids won't go to college. So what do we do with those kids who have decided, Mr. Williams, Mr. Cavan, soon to be Dr. Tillman, Mr. Johnson, Miss Mack, Mr. Mack, Miss Smith, Miss Mallory? What do we do with those kids who say, I don't want to go to college? That's not what my dream is. I want to be a auto mechanic. I want to be an electrician. Like, we've somehow made those jobs seem like they are not as valuable as going to a 4-year institution, because I know some auto mechanics, I know some electricians who are doing very well. So we look at those jobs as not being as prestigious as going to the HBCUs or going to the Harvard and things of that nature. So how do we bring that balance to that discussion?
I think we do exactly what Dexter mentioned about going back to incorporating shop and commerce and all those other classes they used to have. And I also think that they need to start exposing kids to learn early on what kids are interested in and expose them to different career choices, not just wait until high school, but as early as elementary school, linking them and connecting them with people who are doing those things and start exposing them to it, because that's the reality. All kids won't go to a 4-year university. And as you said, there are some they're adults now who they went to school for a certificate at Middle Georgia Tech. They're making way more than I am. So, that's just the reality, but we have to definitely do a better job with exposing them and introducing them to different trades.
And I just want to say real quickly, as a former CTAE teacher, I think CTAE is the place for the majority of this to happen. But I feel like a lot of times CTAE courses are not valued, and I'm not gonna call any names or anything like that. But I've been in situations where I've heard or received secondhand information where even other teachers, academic teachers, don't feel like CTAE courses, CTAE teachers, it's just almost like they're a dumping ground. They don't really value those business and computer science classes. They don't value the family and consumer science classes. If you got a kid that's coming in, that's transferring into your school, they just throw them wherever, regardless of the sequence of classes, and they just drop them in there. And so when the kids see you doing that, the small opportunity that you do have to learn some real world skills, if the kids see that the adults don't value it, they're not going to value it either. I'm trying to teach you how to use a spreadsheet. You don't value the class, and you just sitting back there playing games the whole time. So I just think we need to uplift our CTA teachers and our CTA programs.
And I want to shift and ask 2 more questions. And Smith, if you have any more questions after that, then just let me know. But my first question is about parent engagement, family engagement. How do the education system, or us as educators, how do we manage the idea of teaching kids whose parents are not as educated, or the parents didn't graduate from high school, or the parent didn't dropped out in 8th grade or whatever grade they didn't complete, or they don't have a diploma, GED. And I'm not saying this to be funny or shady, but some of the demographics in our district have those single mother, single parent households, where the mom have about 5 kids, and she's trying to work, make ends meet. And we see this more and more with the virtual learning piece. We see, this virtual learning piece has allowed you to really tap into, just take a peek into some of what these kids deal with on a daily basis. And so my question is, how do we combat that as far as helping the parents get educated so that we can further educate their kids?
Well, I can chime in on that. So as a coach, I deal with that a lot as far as in the demographics. The school that I work in, like I said, we're downtown St. Louis, and we serve the St. Louis City region. So we're just city. So we get all those socioeconomic demographics. And I deal with a lot of single parent mothers, and like you said, not to, no disrespect to anyone, but uneducated, undereducated parents. So one strategy that I usually use is, of course, we build the trust of the parent, right? So that's one of the first things we do. We also, I show an example of what my thought for that kid. So if I think that kid, like you said, Mr. Williams, is an auto mechanic, I make sure, I show the kid examples of it. I get the parent to trust that I know exactly the path for that, to make for their kid to become an auto mechanic. Put them in different situations and give them different examples and different experiences in that field. So now the parent builds trust in you, and relax a little bit and have better understanding, and can rely on you a little bit as far as getting their kid to that point. But like I said, building trust, putting examples in front of the parents. That way, if they're not understanding, if they don't really get it, they might act like they get it because they trust you in the process. So that's just something that I usually do. Like I said, build that trust, put the kids in examples, experiences, and the parents usually buy in. If they don't understand, like I said, they believe in the system that's in place. So.
Okay, I agree with you, Mr. Johnson, where you were saying building that relationship with those parents. But I think this is where teachers get the chance to take off one hat and put on another one, because we wear several hats as educators. We have to then become that mentor to those kids and expose them to as much as we can, so that they are exposed and know that there are other options out there, and that they don't have to follow in the same footsteps. Let them know that they don't have to live that way. Expose them to other things. I'll just speak from, there was one school I was in, we took some kids on a field trip. Guys, we went just from one city in Georgia to another city. And to be on that bus and hear those kids say, "Are we still in Georgia?" And we really went 25 miles down the road on the interstate. And their question was, "Are we still in Georgia?" We went to a college campus. We went to a beach, and their question was, "Is this a real beach?" These kids need exposure.
Yes.
They need exposure. They need to know that where they live is not the world. That is not the entire world. They need to know that how they live is not the only way to live. So I think one of the ways that we can combat that is to, like I said, take off that teacher hat at some point, become that mentor, build a relationship with that child, and expose them to as much as possible.
I completely agree with that. Exposure is
Amen.
huge. Experiences, and we did the same thing when I was a teacher. We used to take kids on we called it a museum field trip. Sounds really boring, but the same thing would happen. We would have, we would be going from one town to the next, and it would be dead silent on the bus because kids were glued to the windows, watching what was going on in the windows. And for example, we went by a wind farm. And for those of you who don't know what a wind farm is, they generate electricity using these large propellers. I don't know if you guys have been exposed to that or not where you're at. But I had a student ask what that was. And jokingly, I told him it was a test propeller site for an aircraft industry. And they believed me. I had to stop, and I used it as a teaching situation. I had to stop and say, guys, this is really what it is. And then I had to talk about the importance of factual information. And it turned into a great teaching moment on the bus going down the highway. But I completely agree. I said all that to say this, completely agree. Experiences and exposure is huge, huge.
And to be from my opinion, this is just me talking. There are a lot of parents who are intimidated by educators, and they have this belief and this feeling about school that, you have people who talk over them, or because they don't have the education or the knowledge to, or the funds to expose their child or their family. They make from a family who nobody valued education as well, So I think, like you said, it is our duty to, we have to expose our kids. And I also think from a district viewpoint, I would love to see districts have some type of parent academy where you invite parents in to have them walk a day in their child's shoes, to have an opportunity to learn. And I know there are several districts who do that. I know in my district, we have a mobile literacy lab where, and I think Bill kind of has one too as well. But you have parents being having the opportunity to come in and learn and get education themselves. So I think we have to really